Welcome, everyone. It's good to have everyone here, and especially as we are learning today with Elijah of the Talmud, a Rabbinic Reconstruction. This class is meeting with Rabbi David Silber, who we had the pleasure of learning with very frequently, hopefully. This is a three-part series, meeting Thursday afternoons at 1 p.m. On the topic that the Talmud offers a fascinating picture of Elijah the prophet. Through an analysis of select stories from two Talmudim, we will try and understand the elements of the Talmudic interpretation. In addition, we will examine the ways in which the Talmud chooses to read the biblical texts. Sources, we do not have a formal source packet for this class. However, sources will be shared from Sfaria on screen, and links will be posted in chat when we switch sources, so please feel free to follow along. I'm going to send out invitations to panelists. If you are just coming in, I recommend accepting the invitation. It's a great way to ask questions and participate in class better. Also, feel free to and welcome to turn on your camera. All that I ask is that if you are not currently actively speaking, to please mute yourself. Otherwise, we get some audio distortion. And Rabbi Silber, for those not familiar, is the dean and founder of Drisha Institute, well published with his most recent book, Malchut Adam, available from Magi Press. If you want to learn more with Rabbi Silber and other Drisha teachers, you can check out his back catalog on our Facebook page and YouTube page. And with that, good afternoon, Rabbi Silber.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome. Good to be with you, as always. All right, so the topic is Eliyahu HaNavi, big topic. We meet 3 times, and specifically interesting is the way that the Talmudim, that is the Bavli and the Yerushalmi, are sort of reimagining Eliyahu. I focused on the Talmudim, and that is to the exclusion of something else, which is quite interesting, namely how, for example, Jewish folklore sees Eliyahu. I don't think the way the Talmudim see Eliyahu and the way Eliyahu is appearing in folklore are necessarily identical. I think they're quite different, or at least there are some differences between them, and our focus will be on the Talmudim. Eliyahu appears, of course, he's really a magical figure. He's well known for coming to the Seder. We imagine him at the Seder. We imagine him at circumcisions. And especially, we imagine him as one of the central figures at the end of the Shabbat, Marav Malka. We sing songs about Eliyahu HaNavi, because Eliyahu HaNavi is the one, as we'll see, who it sort of welcomes the end of days, the Messiah. And according to the Talmud, he's not going to come on Shabbos. He doesn't come on Shabbos or on Friday either. So the first time really he can come after the break of Friday and Shabbat would be Saturday night after Shabbat. And that's one of the reasons that we sing his praises and hope for Eliyahu and for better times. So he appears at the Motzei Shabbat. There are many different smirot that were composed about Eliyahu. In any event, but our focus will not be all of that, although it's quite interesting in its own right. That deserves separate attention. But our focus will be on the Talmud's understanding of Eliyahu. Now, before we get to the Talmud's understanding of Eliyahu, let me just, because I taught a brief course on Eliyahu prior to this, that focused on the Bible. We didn't exhaust it, but let me just make the following observation. Eliyahu appears in 3 places in the Bible. Primarily, he appears in the book of Melachim, the book of Kings, in 1 Kings, and we meet him in chapter 17 of Melachim Aleph. And he's present in chapters 17, 18, and 19 as a central character. Of course, we'll have to touch base on that because the Talmud is playing with these texts. In chapter 20, we don't see Eliyahu at all. Actually, a different prophet is mentioned in 20, but in chapter 21, he figures very prominently. That's the story of the vineyard of Navot. Then again, in chapter 22, which is the last chapter of Melachim Aleph, he doesn't appear. But he does appear again in the first 2 chapters of 2 Kings, and in chapter 2, he ascends to heaven. So that's what we have Eliyahu. We have them in chapter 17, 18, 19, and 21 of First Kings, 1 and 2 of Second Kings, for a grand total of 6 chapters. Then we have Eliyahu mentioned. There is called Eliyahu in the last chapter of the book called Malachi. Malachi is the last of the Treasar, and as it were, understood rabbinically to be the last book of prophecy. At the very end of that, it speaks of Eliyahu Hanavi. We'll come back to that. When I taught the previous class, I didn't get into Malachi, which is a very interesting chapter. And there already you see a different take on Eliyahu, which is very interesting. That's where Eliyahu appears. There's one other reference in the Bible to Eliyahu, which is a strange one, and that is in the book of Divrei Hayamim, in 2 Chronicles. It says that King Yehoram received a letter from Eliyahu, a michtav me Eliyahu. It was a book written by Rabbi Dessler, a Mussar book called Michtav me Eliyahu, a letter from Elijah. The problem with the letter from Elijah to Yoram is that Yoram is found in the book of Kings 7 years after Elijah has ascended to heaven. So the question is, how did they get the letter 7 years? True, the postal service can be slow, that is true. But 7 years is a long time even for them. In any event, that's not our discussion, but that is a well-known problem, the Michtav mi Eliyahu. That's where Eliyahu appears in the Bible. Eliyahu appears in the Talmud in many places, and we're not going to get to all of them, obviously, but I did want to get to, we'll start with there's a selection of texts. We'll start with one from the Masechet Ketuvot very shortly. But before we get to Masechet Ketuvot, I just want to repeat one point that I emphasized when we studied the biblical text of Eliyahu. So for those who were there, I'll just review it, but for those who were not, this is a very important point in my opinion. And that is that when we first meet Eliyahu Hanavi in chapter 17, so there is no introduction to him. In chapter 17, the end of chapter 16, we're told that King Achav is king of Israel. He's married to Jezebel. He's very wicked. And Jezebel introduces all kinds of idolatry into the land, and Achav goes along with it. So at the end of chapter 16, we're told he's a terrible king, worst ever. And then the beginning of chapter 17, with no introduction to this fellow, says Eliyahu the Tishbite stands up and says, there will be no rain or dew until I say so. There's no introduction to who this fellow is. He's a gift from Gilad, the Tishbite from Gilad, Eliyahu Giladi, Toshavei Gilad. But there's also, very surprisingly, no communication from God. It's not that God said to Eliyahu, because the people are so sinful, I'm going to withhold the rain, which is what it says in the Torah. Let's not forget, in the second paragraph of the Shema, that if you don't observe the mitzvot, it's quite explicit. So Eliyahu knows his Chumash, but without consulting with God, he declares, remarkably, no rain, and then he says, there will be no rain until I tell you. It's very unclear whether God even instructed him in the first place, but in point of fact, that is what happens. There is no rain, there's a drought. And then God instructs Eliyahu, because there's no rain, to go off to a wadi, Nachal Krit. The ravens will feed you day and night. So Eliyahu goes out to the wadi in chapter 17 of 1 Kings, and the ravens are feeding him from the brook, but then there's no rain. So after a while, he has no food. So God instructs him in chapter 17 to go to Tzarfat, someplace in northern Israel or Lebanon, and there's a woman. I have commanded the woman to feed you. This is the beginning of the Eliyahu story. I'm just going over this because it will set the tone for what we're doing. So this is chapter 17 of 1 Kings. So Eliyahu goes to this place, and he sees this woman. She's a widow. And he says to her, let's find this verse in chapter 17. He says to her, could you give me, please, a little water to drink? That's in chapter 17, verse number 10. He sees this woman gathering wood. Says, give me a little water, please. This is the woman that God had said, I've commanded her to feed you, right? So she says, she gives him some water. And then he says to her, by the way, while you're at it, could you give me a little lechem, a little food to eat? Maybe it's bread or food to eat. Give me that too. She's commanded to feed him. So the woman says to him, listen, she says, you have to understand something. We have nothing but a handful of flour in the jar and a little oil. I'm gathering a couple of sticks. I can go prepare it for me and my son. We'll eat it, and then we'll die, because we'll die of starvation. This is the last little morsel that we have. So Eliyahu says to her, don't be afraid. I'll tell you what, you make the food, but just give me a little bit in the beginning. And then there's a miracle, that this jug of oil and the flour are never fully consumed. So Eliyahu is able to survive, and then she survives as well, based on the miracle of that the kadakemach, the jug, the flour, the cruse of flour, the cruse of oil, will never be completely consumed. But then what happens in chapter 17, is that a while afterwards, her son gets very sick, and basically the son dies. She has one son and he dies. And here we come to the critical point that I wanted to just go over as an introduction to our topic. And that is, well, there'll be two introductions, but two brief introductions. And the first one is, so she says to him, when her son dies, there's no breath left in him. And in verse 18, she says, Ma'li v'alach ish v'Elohim, O man of God, what is there between us? Did you come to recall my sin and cause the death of my son? So I just wanted to begin by reflecting on that verse. What does she mean by that? I mean, after all, he came to the house, performs this miracle. They're only alive because of his miracle. So now when the son dies, she says, Ma'li v'alach means, what is there between us? Those are antagonistic words. Who needs you? Who asked you to come here? Did you come here to recall my sin and cause the death of my son? So what is she saying over here? It's the question. What is the accusation? And what strikes me anyway, what I suggested, is what she's saying is that you're the kind of person who always looks for what's wrong. You are somebody who sees people's failings and weaknesses and shortcomings, and you are focused on that, and you channel all of your spiritual energy to bring down God's wrath upon such people. Like a big flashlight that shines on people and sees all of their failings. And that's the accusation. And in point of fact, that's how the chapter begins. Eliyahu stands up and says, no rain. So he's the one who's determined, basically, he's pointing out the people's failings, and they are failings. But he's the one who points them out. And in point of fact, God goes along with it, and there is no rain, and people are dying because the famine affects everyone. So that's the accusation. And in response to the accusation of this woman, he takes the child, he goes up to his attic, he lies him on the bed, and he cries out to God. He prays to God. Here we have a prayer to God. First time in the chapter. Oh God, even the widow with whom I live, you will harm. Hariota, you will harm even this widow, even this person who feeds me and cares for me and takes care of me. And then he breathes upon the kind of artificial respiration over here, and he breathes life back into the child. God hears Eliyahu's cry, and the child is revived. The child is brought back to life. Eliyahu picks up this child at the end of chapter 17 and says to the woman, Re'i chai b'nech. Look, he says, your son is alive. Vatomer ha'isha el Eliyahu. And the woman says to Eliyahu, Atazeh yadati. Now I know, Ish Elohim ata, that you are a man of God. Udvar Hashem b'ficha emet. And the word of the God is emet, is true. Here they translate the word is truly in your mouth, but literally it means that in your mouth there is truth. And this is a very interesting way important way to begin our conversation, because what does it mean, now I know you're the man of God? She called him the man of God earlier. She says to him, Ma'aliv alach ish Elohim. She calls him Ish Elohim. She knows he's a man of God. So what does it mean, now I know you're a man of God? She knew it earlier. But of course, the point is, now I know you are a man of God who speaks emet. The point of the emet, truth over here, is truth means, I would say truth is actually reality. Now I know you're truly a prophet. Because it's not just somebody who calls down God's wrath and punishment upon the people, because that's not true. In other words, everybody has failings, but it's not true to the human condition. The truth, right, is when you deal with people as they are, you try to move them forward, of course, but you have to take into account who we are. Now I know, since you've prayed for this innocent child, and you prayed for me, and you turned to God, and you took you prayed for us, you stood in our place. Now I know you are truly an Ish Elohim Emet. That's the truth. Interesting, by the way, is that according to the Medrash, who was this child that Eliyahu revives from the Medrash's standpoint?
Yonah. Yonah.
It's Yonah, of course. And what is Yonah's name?
Amittai.
Yonah ben Amittai, Jonah the son of truth. And of course, the very end of the book of Jonah is based on Eliyahu. Not our topic now, but Jonah is based on Eliyahu. The same thing. He wants God to deliver punishment to the wicked. That's what Jonah wants. Anything short of that for Jonah is not emet, right? He complains at the end. What kind of God are you? You're a God of kindness, but not a God of truth. He leaves out emet, right? Rachum v'chanun, but no, there's no emet here. So the point is, then God responds to Jonah. And what God responds to Jonah is not clear. But one way to read it is, I am a God of truth, but you don't understand emes. Emes doesn't mean just punishment for sin. Emet means dealing with people as they actually are. So yes, people have failings, of course, and they have to be called on the failings, but it's a much bigger picture than you imagine. So my point is that in this very first chapter of Eliyahu, before you get to the Talmud and the Talmud's reconstruction of Eliyahu, there is a reconstruction within the biblical text of Eliyahu. There's the person who tells Eliyahu off and is really teaching him what it means to be a prophet. And it's this mysterious woman. Turns out, of course, in the story, it's funny that he was sent to so-called, go to this woman in Tzarfat, she's going to feed you. But of course, in the story, it's exactly the opposite, isn't it? Yes, he does feed her. She does feed him, but actually he's sent there to feed her. That's the point. She's not there to feed him. He's there to feed her. He made his proclamations and he disappeared. He has plenty. And suddenly the water dries up and he has to go back to the community, and then he has to take care of this person. So the chapter 17, I call the education of a prophet. And that's a very important point, because when the Talmud takes Eliyahu and moves it in all different directions, we have to understand that already in the biblical text, he's being moved in different directions. We'll come back to this later on. I want to make one other point about, let me make one other point for now. I'll make other points later. But that's chapter 17. And then last time, just to review, we also looked at chapter 19. And in chapter 19, we touched upon what is a central, I think the central point about Eliyahu in the Bible and in the Rabbinic Reconstruction. And that is that in chapter 19, Eliyahu wants to die because he feels that he's failed. He had this great event in chapter 18 at Mount Carmel, and the people all cried out, Hashem is God, Hashem is God. But in chapter 19, he's a wanted person. Jezebel's still in charge. She's determined to kill him, just as he has caused the death of the false prophets. So he runs off into the desert and he says he wants to die. But God does not let him die in the desert. Instead, God brings him to Mount Sinai. After walking 40 days and 40 nights without food, God brings him to Mount Sinai. So obviously, the point of chapter 19, which is one of the great chapters of the Bible, the point of chapter 19 is that we have reenactment, as it were, of someone else who was 40 days and 40 nights at Sinai. That's, of course, Moshe. So what's very important for any student of Eliyahu to understand is that in the Tanakh itself, the Tanakh is making an obvious connection between Eliyahu on one hand and Moshe on the other, and actually contrasting Moshe's response to a breaking of the covenant with Eliyahu's response. Moshe's response at Sinai, when Israel broke the covenant with the golden calf, was to pray for the people, was to try to reconcile God with the people. Yes, there was a civil war, 3,000 were killed, but the Jewish people survived that event, and Moshe helps them reconnect to God and acts as a mediator to have God reconnect to the people. The important point over here, and we keep us in mind all the time, is that already in the story of Eliyahu, he is a Moses character. And what's interesting in this regard, and this is propelling the things we'll see in the Talmud as well, which are many, we won't touch up on all of them, obviously. But I mentioned there's another text in which Eliyahu is mentioned. And this text is the last chapter of the little book called Malachi, which in the Hebrew, which in our tradition, and Masorah has only 3 chapters. The Christians have 4 chapters for some reason. We have 3. The very end of Malachi, which is the last prophetic writing, very end of the last prophetic writing, you want to put that up on the screen, in Malachi chapter 3. So I'll read you the last few verses of Malachi chapter 3, and then we'll jump into our first Talmudic text. Let's see, Malachi chapter 3, here it is. Chapter 3, verse number 22. These are the last verses of the prophetic writings. Chapter 3, verse 22, all the way towards the end. And verse 22 reads the following. Zichru, there's right in the bottom there. Zichru Torat Moshe Abdi. Remember, says the prophet, the Torah of Moshe, my servant. Asher tziviti oto b'chorev al kol Yisrael hukim u'mishpatim. I commanded him in Chorev, which is Sinai, laws, statutes, and laws, right? Laws and rules for all of Israel. Don't forget the Torah of Moshe. Verse number 22. What does verse number 23 say? Hinei anochi sholeach lachem et Eliyahu hanavi. Lifnei bo yom Hashem hagadol v'hanara. Behold, I send Elijah the prophet to you before the coming of the awesome, fearful day of the Lord. So what's interesting is Eliyahu is the one who's going to inaugurate the Messiah, the Messianic age. But notice that the pasuk about Eliyahu Hanavi, which appears at the very end of the book of Malachi, follows the pasuk which says Zichru Torat Moshe Avdi, as if to say that Eliyahu is coming, okay, and to inaugurate this new era, Messianic era. But what he will be bringing with him, presumably, is the previous verse. He's going to come, and he once again is going to teach us, or recall for us, or reinstitute for us Torat Moshe Avdi. So here already you have, in a completely different book, a totally different book. When you read these 2 verses in light of what it says in Sefer Mulachim, makes perfect sense. That you see already within the later book of the Bible, already they understand that Eliyahu Hanavi is a kind of Moses figure. Zichru Torat Moshe Avdi, and of course, Hinei Anochi Sholeach Lachem et Eliyahu Hanavi. It's interesting, by the way, just to digress, and now we'll begin with the first rabbinic text, but it's interesting that at the Seder, so there's a tradition that Eliyahu comes to the Seder. That tradition, I don't know how old it is, actually. I don't think it's as old as people think. There is a tradition to open the door, but in the tradition of opening the door, there's no mention early on of Eliyahu Hanavi. That's attested much later. But in any event, for several hundreds of years, there's this tradition that Eliyahu Hanavi is visiting us at the Seder. And what strikes me as very interesting is that one person who's conspicuously absent from the Seder, certainly we barely mention his name at all, maybe one time, if at all, is of course the person we expect to mention at the Seder over and over again, namely Moshe. You would expect at the Seder, Yetziat Mitzrayim, that was Moses' task, to take the Jews out of Egypt. Moshe means the one who drew us out. That's what his name is. You would expect at the Seder multiple references to Moshe. There are virtually no references to Moshe whatsoever at the Seder. So I've wondered always, for many years now, whether this idea of the cup of Eliyahu is a kind of stand-in for Moshe. We don't mention Moshe directly, perhaps because it would detract from the fact that God is the one who took us out of Egypt. But from sort of indirectly, obliquely, we are referencing Moshe through Moshe's, through Moshe's kind of, if not twin, but one who shares an identity with Moshe, namely Eliyahu Hanavi, once again, who inaugurate the future redemption, the final Pesach, as it were, but also who will bring in Torah Moshe Avdi. And that's perhaps one of the reasons that Eliyahu figures so prominently, at least in the last several hundred years, at the Seder. Okay, so let's stop here for a moment just to review what we have. Very brief introduction that could go on with a lot more, but the point I want to make here is that within the biblical texts themselves, there's already a shift in Eliyahu from someone who simply pronounces judgments, a zealot for God, let's call him a zealot for God. That's one way to, that's the original, when you first encounter Eliyahu. Who asked this guy to talk about drought and suffering and death? Who asked him? There's no evidence. God didn't tell him to do it. If God did tell him, it's not in the text. But he feels compelled to do so. And then as we read that first story, and even as we read the second story that I mentioned, chapter 19, in each of these two stories, there's an attempt to change Eliyahu's thinking. In the first instance, the woman informs him what it means to be a true prophet. And in the second instance, God informs him what it means to be a leader in a time of national crisis, not to give up on the people or say it's hopeless, we can't do anything about it, which is what he's saying. He wants to die. There's no point. And then God takes Eliyahu to the Sinai and reminds what Moshe did at Sinai when faced with the golden calf, which was certainly a crisis of enormous proportion. And Moses did not say, forget it. God says, I'll make you the nation, forget them. No, says Moshe, you can't do that. These are your people. So these are the two lessons there Eliyahu is being taught in the biblical text. Okay, and now our task here in these 3 weeks is to get some sense of how the Talmudim imagine Eliyahu. And I want to reiterate, as opposed to the folk legends of Eliyahu, because they're two different things. Folk legends are one thing, which are very interesting, but our focus will be on selected stories from the Talmud. There are many stories in the Talmud, so I'll begin with one in Masechet Ketuvot, which is on 105b in Tractate Ketuvot. So you have that on the screen, Ketuvot 105b. Towards the bottom of the page, it starts with the words Rav Anan. Rav Anan aiti le'ahu gavra hanto de gildeni.
Could you repeat that?
Yes, Rav Anan aiti le'ahu gavra hanto de gildeni. It's about 10 lines from the bottom on 105b. I'll read and translate it. We have a translation right here. Let's see. Keep going. It's 105b towards the bottom of the page. Yeah, you have it right there. There, you got it right there. There it is. There it is. You got it. What did you had it anyway? Where is it? You keep going. You passed it, I think. No. Keep past it. No, you passed it. Go back. Go down. 1 second. Go back again. You had it before, and then you moved it for some reason. Go back to 105b, towards the bottom of the page. About 10 lines from the bottom of the page.
Give me a moment. I'm not working with a standard Bilman Shas.
I think it was like 16 or 17 you were at.
Could you repeat the line again?
Rav Anan starts with Rav Anan
None.
said to his benefactor in English. A certain man brought Rav Anan a basket of fish. That's how it starts.
Okay,
Rav Anan
found it.
emptied
Okay,
out
found it.
You got it? Fine, put it up. That's it. Right, exactly. Right in the middle of the page. Rav Anan, I'll translate it. I can't find. Rav Anan, Gavra Kanto to Gildani, the Begili. So a certain man, Rav Anan is an early Amora, about 3rd century Amora, and a great scholar, and he was a judge. So a certain man brought him a basket of fish. On my way, Rav Anan said to him, Maya v'ditich. What is your business? Why are you here? Amalei, he said to him, Dina Italy. I have a lawsuit. I came for it. I have a trial. It's going to be in your court. Lo kabu mine. Rav Anan refused to accept the gift. Amalei, pasilna lach medina. He said, I'm disqualified from rendering judgment for you because you brought me a gift, and a judge is not allowed to take gifts from either of the parties. I'm not going to accept the gift, but the fact that you offered me a gift disqualifies me from rendering judgment. The larger context of the sugya here, by the way, this is one story. There are several such stories, many stories about judges that were offered some kind of gift, and the Gemara is they didn't accept it, but they also did not permit themselves to be a judge, even when the gift is not an actual gift. It looks like a gift. No, since you did me a favor of some sort, that disqualifies me from judging. This is the whole long sugya. This is one of the stories. So the guy says to him, Omale, the man said to Rav Anan, Dina Damar lo be'ina. That's fine. I don't want you to judge me. I have no problem. However, kubule l'kabel mar. I want you to accept my gift. Lo l'manon mar mi'akruve bikurim. Because giving you a gift, he says, it's not about judging. I don't want you to be the judge, but I want you to accept the gift because it's like a person that brings first fruits to the temple. It's not actually first fruits, but giving it to the great scholar. The gift to the great scholar, he says, I see as a kind of gift to God. So please accept my offering. The Tanya. And how do I know that bringing gifts to a great person is like bringing bikurim? And they quote a story from the book of Malachim. Not about Eliyahu, but about his pupil Elisha. Eliyahu has a pupil. V'ish ba mibal shel isha, vayavo le'ish Elohim lechem bikurim, esrim lechem sorim v'karmel b'siklono. So it tells the story. A man came from Baal Shel Isha, a place. He brought to Elisha bread of bikurim, 20 loaves. V'chi Elisha ochel bikurim hava? Was Elisha one who ate bikurim? Says Rashi, he wasn't a priest. The priests eat bikurim. Fine. El Malacha, it must teach you, maybe Doron with Talmud Chacham, he will makri. Someone gives a gift to a great Torah scholar, it's regarded as if he's offering bikurim. Fine. That's what he says to him. I didn't come to, so you can't judge me, that's fine. But please take my gift anyway. Amale, Rav Anan said to this fellow, I did not want to accept the gift, but now that you gave me your reason, I will accept it. Okay, I will accept your gift. Initially, I thought it was about judging. I accept the gift. Fine. So he can't judge, but the fellow did come for a judgment. Shadrei Lukame to Rav Nachman. So having disqualified himself from judging, he sends this fellow to Rav Nachman, right? Rav Nachman was a great judge at the same time as Rav Anan. Shalach le, and he sent him, maybe in a letter, Nedaine mar lahai gavra. May master judge this man. Dana anan pusil no way wadina. Because Anan, I am disqualified from judging him. He didn't say why he's disqualified. So I can't judge this guy. Would you please judge him instead of me? That's what Rav Anan said. Fine. Omar. So Rav Nachman, when he gets this letter, Omar, Rav Nachman says, if he sent me this kind of a note, Shmami no krevehu. Obviously, this man must be a relative of Rav Anan, and the relative's not allowed to judge a relative. He presumes, incorrectly, that the reason Rav Anan can't judge is because he's related. Fine. So he said, right? He says, have a koyim dina diyatme kameh. At the time this man walked into the court, the fellow who had given Rav Anan the gift, Rav Nachman was about to judge a case involving an orphan. Omar. So Rav Nachman said, now on the top, Rav Nachman said, Hayaseh, the Hayaseh. Says judging this lawsuit is a commandment. The Hayaseh and judging the other lawsuit also is a commandment. In other words, in one case, he's assuming that the relative of Rav Anan must be a great scholar also. On the other hand, you have an orphan. Which case should I judge first? So we say, I did. Which case should I judge first? So he says, well, each one is a commandment. You know what? I say to cover HaTorah adif. It's better to honor the Torah. So let me judge. I'll tell the orphan to wait, and I'll judge this fellow's case first, the one that Rav Anan sent to him. So Slika Ladina, so he set aside the judgment of the orphan. Kevin dechaza baldine yakra deka avidway. When the person on the other side of the lawsuit against this fellow saw the honor that Rav Nachman was giving him, istatim tanote. His arguments were blocked. I guess that was psychologically he felt it's a hopeless case. Obviously, the judge favors the other guy. It must be a very important person, and he didn't present a very strong case. He presented a weaker case because he felt frightened by it, or he felt that there's not a chance to win. Right, that's the story. So this is within the context. The Gemara has several such stories that a judge is forbidden to take a bribe. Now, in this case, he didn't take the bribe. He refused to take the bribe. He takes it at the end because it's not a bribe, and then he sends him off to Rav Nachman. Fine. Now we have the following story. Rav Anan Haviragu Eliyahu Hanavi Gabe. So the Gemara says, and we have this in several places in the Talmud. Rav Anan, Eliyahu Hanavi would regularly come to Rav Anan. Why would Eliyahu Hanavi come to Rav Anan? He was one of his chavrusas, because they were going together. So Eliyahu would come to Rav Anan to learn Torah on a regular basis. He would show up. Fine. Having masnile seided is very important. Having masnile seided Eliyahu. He would teach Rav Anan something called Seder Eliyahu. Here we have in the Talmud, Seder Eliyahu. It sounds like there's some kind of set of teachings or a book called, so he would teach him actually. They would come together, they'd sit and learn, and Eliyahu would teach him Seder Eliyahu. We'll come back to this. This is very important. The order of Elijah. Haven de Avad Hachi. When Rav Anan did this, when he sent the lawsuit over to Rav Nachman, Istalik. Eliyahu stopped coming. He's not coming anymore. He's not going to teach this guy anything. Rav Anan's a big guy. No, he's not teaching him. Yotiv b'tanita uboy rachbi. Rav Anan observed the fast and pleaded for mercy. Fi'ata. So Eliyahu came back. But when he came back, he terrified Rav Anan. Rav Anan was frightened when he came back. V'oved tevuta. Rav Anan made a chest. V'yotiv gabe. V'yotiv kameh. And he sat inside the chest. When Eliyahu would come, he wouldn't sit in front of him. He would go into a chest close up the chest, and sit inside the chest. Adi apik le sidre, until Eliyahu taught him the entire order. V'hainu di amri, and that is why people say, Seder Eliyahu Rabbah, the Seder Eliyahu Zuta. There are two orders of Eliyahu's teaching, the great order and the small order, Eliyahu Rabbah and Eliyahu Zuta. So this is the end of the story. The story has actually many different pieces to it, but I just wanted to reflect, we can all reflect upon the story. It's quite a famous story. The Gemara speaks of something called Seder Eliyahu Rabbah and Seder Eliyahu Zuta, as if the Gemara is aware of something, there's some kind of Seder Eliyahu, some kind of set of teachings of Eliyahu, the great teachings of Eliyahu and Eliyahu Zuta. Now, we do actually have, just parenthetically, we do have such a work of Eliyahu Rabbah and Eliyahu Zuta. It was probably composed around the 10th century, actually, and it's a very interesting work, the great order and the small order, and many people have spent a lot of time working on it, etc. It's quite interesting, but leaving that aside, what is the takeaway from the story over here? Let's start with this. What is the takeaway of the story? Our topic is Eliyahu Hanavi. So what do you see about Eliyahu Hanavi over here? What is this about? Obviously, he's very disturbed by the story. He doesn't blame Rav Nachman, by the way. He doesn't seem to have his main anger seems to be directed against this Rav Anan. What did Rav Anan do wrong? So I'll make one suggestion over here, and then I'm happy to hear other suggestions. These stories are very open-ended. There's a lot to be said about them. But it strikes me that the larger context of the story is what the Gemara calls and the Torah calls shochad. The Torah says in the book of Devarim, lo tikach shochad. A judge should not take a bribe. That's what it says. Why not? Ki ha-shochad yaver pichim right. Yaver pichim v'salef divrei tzadikim. So the shochad will blind the eyes of those who can see, and make false the words of the righteous. So this plain meaning is you're sitting as a judge, and some guy walks up, hey, here's some money to judge the case, and obviously, when you take the money, on some level, consciously or unconsciously, you might feel indebted and take the side of the one who gave you the money, even if it's actually unconscious, but somehow it's going to affect you. But the question is, what are the parameters of shochad? So the Gemara has a whole bunch of cases. In this particular case, what is the shochad? Because Rav Anan not only didn't initially refuses it, he actually doesn't judge either. He doesn't judge. He says, I can't judge your case. I'll take what you gave me, but I can't judge your case. But then he sends him off to Rav Nachman. And he says, please try this guy's case. I can't judge him. Now, he didn't say why he can't judge him. So Rav Nachman assumes that it's probably a relative or something. And then he also assumes that a relative of this great scholar, maybe also a scholar, or maybe he feels he's honoring Rav Anan who sent him. And covered HaTorah takes precedence over the orphan. And when Eliyahu sees this, understands this, sees everything, he refuses to teach Rav Anan Torah anymore. He's not going to teach him any Torah. So the point, I think, is, our question is, let me step back 1 second. As a general proposition, let me state the general proposition, my working assumption. In general, is that when you have midrashim, whether in the Talmud, outside the Talmud, but especially in the Talmud, or the Midrash Rabbah, my assumption, which may seem obvious to all of you, but believe me, in the world of the university, it's far from obvious, is that the midrashim are presuming something about the text. They're not simply constructing something whole cloth. They're constructing something out of a previous tradition or set of traditions. Now, what is it about? What is this idea of shochad? So Eliyahu Hanavi, apparently, when it comes to taking shochad, is some kind of fanatic. Eliyahu believes that when you, shochad doesn't mean just taking some money and putting in your pocket. Shochad means being in a position where you can be influenced by anything other than divine thought or divine law. Which is why, and this is what they're picking up with Eliyahu. Eliyahu Hanavi, I would say, is a kind of otherworldly figure, even before he ascends to heaven. He's somebody who doesn't reside in the court of the king. Eliyahu Hanavi of the Bible resides on top of mountains, resides in a cave, resides on the other side of the Jordan. He's not somebody who is a people person in any manner, shape, or form. In fact, he's a hairy man. And a hairy person, right? Esav is a hairy person. He's Isadeh. He's not a civilized person. He's a complete, ultimate outsider. He's like Moshe Rabbeinu to the 10th power. Moshe is also an outsider, but Eliyahu is even more so. And we know nothing about Eliyahu's family. Does he have a wife? Does he have children? There's nothing about Eliyahu that's personal. So Eliyahu believes, apparently, or his behavior suggests, that any interaction with the powers that be, by definition, is a kind of shochad, because you can't speak the truth, because you're under the influence of all kinds of forces. The only way to speak the truth is to absent yourself from society. That's his thinking. And this Rav Anan is guilty over here. First of all, because he does accept the gift at the end of the day, but more importantly, because he didn't make it very clear when he sends off to Rav Nachman with this letter. He's suggesting in one manner or other, that he has an interest in helping this fellow. And therefore, the Gemara says, Rav Nachman can't judge fairly. That's number one. And then number two, and then I'll stop at this point and hear what you have to say about this. The other point is that the Gemara makes the point that apart from there are two problems with the case. One is that the adversary in the case feels psychologically that he can't speak up because he feels that he doesn't have a chance. The other sees he's favoring the other guy. But the other point is, prior to that Rav Nachman had a different case he was going to try, the case of the orphan. And Rav Nachman delays the orphan's case to judge this guy's case first. And here you have another pet project of the Talmud when it comes to Eliyahu Hanavi and in the folklore. Eliyahu Hanavi is extremely kind when it comes to poor scholars and when it comes to orphans. When it comes to downtrodden people, that's what Eliyahu Hanavi is all about in the Talmud. The people that are down and out, as it were, the people that society has left behind or shunted aside, those are the people he cares about. So in this particular story, there are two problems here. One is that the orphan got pushed aside. That doesn't work for Eliyahu. And the second is that Rav Anan is guilty of taking a bribe. You may not call it a bribe, but he calls it a bribe. And the point is, this idea, I heard someone speak recently, that Eliyahu and Rabbinic think he's this kindly old man. That may be true in Jewish folklore, but it certainly ain't true in the Talmud Bavli and Yerushalmi. He's not a kindly old man, not at all. He does kindness to many people. He's, in a certain sense, the same fanatic he is in the Bible. He's just fanatical about other things. He's fanatical about making sure that truth wins out and that people on the outs are fully protected. So I think this is an interesting story. That's number one. And I'll just say before I hear your comments about this, that there's something else also very interesting about the story, apart from the fact that we discover such a thing exists as Eliyahu Rabbah and Eliyahu Zuta, this is the source actually. But apart from that, I wanted to revisit later, what's this idea of Rav Anan going into the box? He sits inside a box, inside a teva. What is that about? I just put that on the table to think about. I'll stop at this point for a moment and take comments or questions about anything till this point.
And if you're an attendee who hasn't accepted a panelist invitation, if you use the raise hand function, I'm happy to help you ask a question.
Is there anything in the chat?
It's been quiet in chat on both platforms.
Quiet in the chat, quiet in everywhere, okay? I would have 100 questions here. I don't know about you. Okay, fine. Anyway,
Wait, I have a question. Well,
yeah. speak
just
up.
a suggestion.
Yeah.
The sitting in the box, which is strange, but it is reminiscent of Moshe being put into that little crack of the rock, before the divine presence passes over him.
Right, so you connected to Moshe sitting in the cleft of the rock, which, by the way, with Eliyahu, he also sits in the rock, because in chapter 19, when God brings him to Sinai, he's inside a cave. So there's a parallel, a very specific parallel to Eliyahu in the cleft of the rock. So what you're suggesting there's another Moshe connection over here. Anybody else have a suggestion about that?
I have a question.
Yes.
How does a story like this evolve? Because it's not in the Tanakh. It's not in the Nevi'im. How does this come into the Talmud?
The Talmud is not, there are thousands of stories in the Talmud that are not in Tanakh. The Talmud sees it as part of what I guess we call it Torah Shebaal Peh. The Talmud is not just reinterpreting Eliyahu Hanavi. The Talmud is reinterpreting the Chumash in general. The Talmud constructs out of a minimal number of verses in the Torah an entire system of law. Not only does it construct an entire system of law, sometimes it seems to be at variance with the plain meaning of the text, but in order to construct an entire system of law, it proposes that we can find within the words or the letters of the Torah not only a full system of law, but a full system of law which both warns you not to do something and tells you what the punishment is if you do it. So I see these stories about Eliyahu Hanavi as being of one piece with the general understanding of the rabbinic tradition that is within the human power to extend the words of God and often to interpret them, and sometimes it would appear to reinterpret them. So this is just part of a much bigger project, which is the rabbinic project, which is the project of, in a kind of interpretive tradition. That the idea being that the Torah, the basic ideas of the Torah are eternal, but the application of them or the understanding of them may change from time to time. And that's a big question. What happens to laws that basically seem to run counter to our best moral selves? What do you do with them? And those and other such questions, which is a very important question. But as I said, this is, the Talmud, these are stories that are not, I think, based in history of any sort, obviously. They are rabbinic constructions, but their construction is trying to make a point, as are the stories of the Torah. They are stories which are trying to teach us something. Most of the Torah is not law. 80% or more are stories, but the stories with moral teachings, presumably. That's what it's about. In terms of your point about Moshe, about connected to Moshe, I also thought it's connected to Moshe, but I thought it's connected to something else about Moshe. The story I thought is connected to is when Moshe comes down the mountain the second time, when he goes up to get the Torah the second time, and the Torah says, and Moshe came down the mountain the second time, the people did not realize, Moshe did not realize that his face was shining, Karan or Panav, and everybody was afraid to go near him. So what he does is he puts on a mask. He covers up his face. And it strikes me that this is somewhat similar to that as well. The idea of not being able to stand before Eliyahu as he's teaching. So in this case, instead of Eliyahu putting on a mask, he climbed inside a box, basically. But it's the same idea. It's the distance between the teacher whose Torah is pure and the great teacher of Torah, Rav Anan, who, at least from Eliyahu's standpoint, is not pure. Because if you are connected to any sort of power, remember, Rav Nachman, by the way, is not just a great teacher, he's also an important political figure. part of the Reish Galuta. So he's, for Eliyahu, that's all an anathema. Unlike other prophets, unlike Elisha, his disciple, who was in the court of the king, who deals with kings all the time, Eliyahu Hanavi is not that way. Eliyahu Hanavi is the ultimate, complete, and total outsider. He comes from outside the land. He ascends someplace or other, no family, and he doesn't dwell. And he's, as I said, he's an Isayar who has, he has a hairy mantle. It means he's an uncivilized human being. And the claim he would make is that to the extent that you deal with other people and within a certain tradition, and you are influenced by or part of a larger community, your Torah will never be pure, because there are all kinds of influences on you or pressures put upon you, and you can't really get to the truth. Now, Eliyahu Hanavi is extreme, obviously, but the basic point that I just said and attributed to Eliyahu is at its core, in my way of thinking, 1000% true. Of course, it's true. We're all vested in something, and therefore, our judgments are not necessarily what we truly believe to be right. We have all kinds of other calculations. What's so-and-so going to think? How would it affect this one? How would it affect my job, my family, my Rebbe, my grandparents, my tradition, my imagined tradition? The list goes on and on. So that's for sure true. And that's one of the themes that we have spoken about at the beginning of Shmuel with Chana. Chana is a person who is ultimately the bottom of the barrel altogether, and therefore she sees clearly. She sees what's right and wrong. Of course, she has no reason not to, because she's basically the outsider to begin with, the ultimate outsider. Anyway, that's the story. This is the good way to start the stories of Eliyahu Hanavi. That's one point. So Eliyahu Hanavi has a particular position, and it's extreme. He is even here an extreme, and I'll later on, either this week or next week, get to I think a better sense, a definitional sense of what Eliyahu Hanavi is about, according to several Talmudic, according to very straightforward Talmudic reading, because it's not just Eliyahu Hanavi. Eliyahu Hanavi for the Talmud is part of a bigger group of people. One might say he's one of the best representatives of a different group of people that we'll get to next week. But I just wanted to start. Let me get back to one other text over here.
Can I say one point?
Could
Yes.
I just mention something?
Yes, please speak.
I just want to mention that is Eliyahu to a certain extent a foil or the absolute opposite of the Nachash. He is the representative of the purity of the connection to God in Gan Eden, and in real life we can't function that way. So that it's an ideal and a harbinger of whatever, and the truth of the matter is we need the Masecha or the box to be continuously taught by Eliyahu, who's in the Zohar. He's constantly teaching people.
He teaches people in the Talmud Bavli too, all the time. He has many chavrusas, Eliyahu, in the Bavli. And we'll get back to that point. Your point is, I think, very well taken, actually. I think that the idea of Eliyahu inaugurating in a different kind of world is because he may be, as you say, a foil, or he may be even, there are certain people who they can't themselves be the leaders, because one might make the same claim about Moshe Rabbeinu. And Moshe is not quite as extreme as Eliyahu, but it's very similar to Eliyahu. And Eliyahu is based on Moshe. He's the outsider. Let's not forget, Moshe doesn't enter the land. That is to say, when you set up your society, Moshe is not the one at the head. Moshe is giving us certain principles which we try to implement within the world in which we live. But the world in which we live is not the world in which Moshe lives. Moshe is with God. Moshe is not with the people. According to the Medrash, he separates from his wife. He's a teacher. But fundamentally, as the Talmud puts it, Moshe stands with God. So, yeah, I think the point is very well taken. I think that Eliyahu is an extreme, necessary, perhaps, but an important teacher who puts out a different point of view. And I'll come back to your point next time, because I think that fits in very well with what I want to suggest about Eliyahu Hanavi and the Bavli in general. Because I don't think he is unique, but he's not the only one. There are a group of such people in the Bavli that have great value, but they're not living in the world we live. Eliyahu's not living in our world. He lives in his own world. Is it actually 2 o'clock now?
It is.
This can't be. Is it 2?
Yes,
So that's
it's
the
2,
end
and
of
I
the class?
have 2 people who have had questions.
Let's take questions. So I'm sorry about that. I thought we had much more time. Okay, we'll continue next time. Go ahead. More questions.
Okay, I have a question in the chat, and then I see Debbie, you've been waiting. So in that order. First from in chat from Elena, it seems that by putting himself in a box, he's agreeing to do things Eliyahu's way. He's separating himself from the world to focus on Eliyahu's teaching in Eliyahu's way. Elena, did I get that right?
Well, I don't think he's accepting Eliyahu's way. I think he's recognizing, I would say the opposite. He's recognizing that he's accepting Eliyahu's critique, I think he accepts the critique, but Rav Anan is a standard Amora and teacher who has his pupils, who has his community, etc. Eliyahu is someone who has no community. Eliyahu he doesn't have a community. He's the ultimate, complete, and total outsider in every way. And he just, appropriately, he sort of doesn't even, he's not even in this earth, even after he dies. He's up someplace in heaven. He comes back to visit. So I wouldn't put it that way, but yes, I think that, look, Eliyahu has what to teach him. That's the point. And you learn from many people in this world, some of whom you respect enormously, and some of whom you respect enormously in a certain area of life, and you don't in other areas of life. And that's one of the questions the Talmud raises. Rabbi Meir learned from Elisha ben Avuya, who, depending on what stories you read, some of them paint them in a very dark way. But he felt you can learn from all kinds of people. And the trick is to learn from somebody, to take the good and to throw away the other stuff, and not to be drawn into all the other stuff. That's a whole longer conversation. Who else had something to say here?
Debbie.
Debbie, go ahead.
Yeah, I was thinking that between Eliyahu and Rav Anan, that Eliyahu embodies an extreme, and therefore he would look down on Rav Anan, who is grappling with realities and is always going to fall short in Eliyahu's estimation. Anybody who deals with reality, that's what Hashem was trying to teach Eliyahu the whole time, that the pure way that you're looking at things is not how it is down here on earth. And that's when he says, you're out of a job. He could never, what Anan, there's always relativism, and I can't take this, the gift from you and then still be impartial. Eliyahu is always minutak from the people. He would never have that problem. Firstly, nobody would want to give him a gift because he's so so fiery. He doesn't connect to the people. So Rav Anan has that problem. And I think every judge wrestles with that. Biodim or below yodim. It's always very hard to be impartial like that because we all have connections, but Eliyahu doesn't. That's what he finds himself on.
My point is not to suggest that we should be Eliyahu Hanavi. That's not my point. My point is that the Bavli, what I think is interesting over here, I heard someone recently talk about the Talmud transformed him so-and-so into a kindly old man. He's not a kindly old man in the Talmud Bavli at all. Actually, that's just a misreading of the Bavli. Could be in the folklore. But my point is, the Talmud tries to be honest to who Eliyahu actually is. And yes, he's taught certain lessons within the biblical text itself. That's how I began. But at the end of the day, there is a fanaticism to Eliyahu. And the point is that he speaks a certain kind of truth. And that's the truth we have to hear. Now, how we apply that truth in the real world is another story. but at a certain level, he actually speaks the truth. And I think that's what the Bavli is after over here. There is something to be said for what he's thinking. The truth is, if you sent this letter to Rav Nachman in a way that caused a miscarriage, from his standpoint, the miscarriage of justice, a mistreatment of the orphan. And for that, Eliyahu Hanavi, from his way he sees it, you're not the kind of guy I'm going to teach anymore. Why should I teach you my Torah when you pervert it? So he prays, and he's able to bring him back. But there's still the distance between. I don't think it's so much a critique of Rav. I mean, I think there is a critique of Rav Anan here. I think that's true. But I mean, you're talking on a very high level. Rav Anan said, I can't accept this gift. I can't judge you anymore. I'm not going to take your gift either. Oh, it's just a gift for the scholar. Okay, I'll take it. And that, I think, is a problem for Eliyahu. No, don't take the gift either, because since he initially intended to give it to you maybe as a bribe, whatever his teretz is afterwards, that money is tainted from Eliyahu's standpoint.
Right.
But I might argue otherwise. But I mean, that's my point is that not that Eliyahu is, we can live all as Eliyahu, but that there's a truth to Eliyahu's teaching, emet. We say Moshe emet for Torah emet. But Eliyahu is called in some of these, and he wrote Ish ha'emet. There's a certain truth to Eliyahu. But we'll deal with it next week. Next week, we'll look at two other Gemaras. We'll start with the Gemara next week. Very interesting Gemaras. The Gemaras are fascinating, actually. And we'll see the same thing about Eliyahu as a Moshe figure. And just to say coming attractions, Eliyahu as one who is a teacher of Torah, but I think Eliyahu has a different Torah, actually. The Torah of Eliyahu and the Torah of Moshe are not the same, as we'll see next week. Or the Torah of the rabbis in Eliyahu are certainly not the same. There's a very famous story that we'll get to next week, which is, we'll talk, our story is brief. Hopefully there'll be a discussion around this story. So thank you all very much. Looking forward to next week, continuing Eliyahu Hanavi. Thanks a lot.
All right. Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you, Rabbi Silber, for today's class. Our next class at Drisha is also with Rabbi Silber on Sunday morning at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time with the 7th session of Jacob and his children. You can find out about this and other Drisha class offerings online at drisha.org/classes. Thank you, everyone.